Obviously, hopefully a lot of voters turned in, but I cleared myself well and said what I wanted to say, at least most of the time, and thought it went well.
Mr. Vance,
Just trying to question, yeah.
Mr. Vance, do you believe that your opponents calling you never Trumper is not founded, or how do you position yourself as a former president?
Well, I mean, I talk with the president fairly often about the race. I think I'm in a good place with him personally. I think the record's pretty clear, and I've been very honest about the record that I didn't like Trump back in 2016. Been very publicly supportive of the president for the last several years, voted for the president in 2020. And I think I'm actually the person who's closest to the president on the issues like trade, immigration, foreign policy. I mean, that's just one obvious example, right? I think that, you have some of these guys who last time around endorsed a European no-fly zone. That is something that you could imagine an establishment Republican from 2005 saying it's a terrible idea, and it's something Donald Trump would never endorse, right? So I think the issues actually really do matter, not just to the president, but to a lot of voters out there.
To kind of build off that no-fly zone
Yeah.
that you mentioned, you said that we should declare the Mexican cartels a terrorist organization.
Sure.
Now, you seem incredibly skeptical of any intervention in Ukraine, but at the same time, you seem more than happy to have the U.S. military involved in enforcing drug policy across the Mexican border. How do you square those things?
Because one of them very directly affects our vital national security interests, one of them kills our people, and the other doesn't.
Are you planning on campaigning with Peter Thiel in the coming weeks?
With Peter Thiel?
Yes.
I cannot imagine Peter Thiel would be interested in going on the campaign trail, and I imagine a lot of voters don't know who Peter is. Obviously, he's a friend of mine, but no, I don't expect to campaign with him. Yeah.
During your response to the first question, you referred to former President Trump as the president. Who do you believe to be the current sitting president of the United States?
Well, the guy who sits in the Oval Office is certainly Joe Biden.
What plans have you outlined that will benefit the people of Southeast Ohio?
Well, I mean, the most obvious, of course, is energy policy, right? So our energy policy is pretty jacked up right now. It means that you can destroy a lot of direct energy jobs, but also make it more expensive to manufacture because manufacturing is so energy intensive. I think both of those things really affect the people of Southeast Ohio. Obviously, huge logistics, transportation hubs. You make gas or diesel go up to $4, $5, $6 a gallon. That affects the people of Southeast Ohio. So I think economically, there's the way that I put this to try to create some narrative around this is Democrat policies are incredibly good if you work in digital technology, if you work in finance, or if you work in education. If you work in the entire rest of the economy, in transportation, logistics, and energy, and manufacturing, Democrat policies are terrible for you. And that's where most people in Ohio, especially most people in Southeast Ohio, actually live and work is in the non-digital, non-finance economy.
How will your policies support the education of the average Ohioan?
Well, one of the things I push pretty hard is that we have a ridiculous education system in this country that sends everybody to four-year college degree programs, or tries to send everybody to four-year college degree programs, which loads a generation up with debt and doesn't teach a lot of useful skills in the process. There's sort of a labor supply issue here as well, where you have a lot of workers who want a lot of people with hard skills. They don't want people who have no useful skill and $80,000 worth of student debt. So I think the biggest education policy difference between where I'd like us to be and where we are right now is that we should spend way more on vocational education, not force everybody into four-year degree programs.
What would you do with the current student debt crisis?
Well, I think, my view, and, a lot of establishment Republicans will say, well, the student debt crisis has nothing to do, the kids got the debt. I think that's the wrong approach. I think the left's answer is to put that debt on the backs of taxpayers, which I think is an even worse answer because it effectively gives the people who caused the debt crisis a get out of jail free card, right? We know where this came from. It came from college administrators who sold a lot of students a bill of goods, who inflated costs in the process. I think the colleges should be on the hook for a lot of this debt. Right now they're not, and of course you can't discharge it in you can't discharge student debt in bankruptcy. The university administrators who caused this debt bomb should have to pay some consequences for it.
Mr. Vance,
Yeah.
at the end of the debate, you and Josh Mandel referenced questions that you had not been asked.
Yeah.
Would you like to clarify your position on those, and maybe more importantly, talk about why don't you think those questions were asked? Should those questions be asked going forward? Do you think people might be confused as to why those questions weren't asked?
Well, I mean, look, obviously the debate is put on by the Ohio Debate Commission, and I think that, at a very basic level, the goal here, right, we're running in a Republican primary. The voters who are voting in a Republican primary should have their interests served. by the Ohio Debate Commission. Now, the voters now are going to be different from the voters in November, but voters now, especially, man, our Republican voters, conservative primary voters, they really care about the Second Amendment, really care about the abortion and life issue, they really care about the big tech question. And I do worry that in some ways the questions reflected the interests of the liberal establishment more than conservative primary voters, which, look, I'm not trying to work the refs. I'm a big boy. I can take whatever questions people throw at me. I do think it's unfair to the voters who probably tuned in and were hoping to find out a little bit more about some of the issues that I mentioned.
Since it's a debate, I guess the issue was, I don't want to assume for the moderator, but do you think there's enough of a difference between your position on abortion and the Second Amendment and the other opponents on the podium with you?
Well, I think so, absolutely. There's differences of emphasis, there's differences of policy, but I think a lot of the questions that were asked, there were a lot of agreements, right? I mean, part of the reason you do a debate is not just to flesh out the obvious issues where people disagree, but issues where maybe you think there is agreement, there are some differences of emphasis, differences in how we talk about things. So I think even in issues where there's general unity within the party, you should ask people how they feel, because one, you might get an answer you don't expect, and two, you might see how the candidates, or the voters might see how the candidates actually respond to those different points of emphasis.
How would you differentiate yourself from Mendel on abortion and the Second Amendment?
Well, look, I mean, I think that a great example, right? Abortion. Okay, I assume that Josh. Actually, I don't know what his position on abortion is, right? So that's kind of that's why I should be asked in the debate. Is I'm I pay attention to this a lot, and I'm not totally sure what Josh's view on abortion is, right? My view is 100% pro-life. But I also think there are like some deeper questions to talk about when it comes to the life question, like how is it that we have become a society where a lot of young families don't feel like they can bring children into it, right? How is it that we, for the first time in our nation's history, have become a country that doesn't have enough children to replace itself in the next generation? Like there are these deeper questions about that abortion implicates and affects that we just don't talk about in our politics, but a lot of our voters do care about. I go to all these town halls, and trust me, people really care about why we don't have enough kids in our country. Right, that's a big question. Abortion is part of it, but there are a lot of other things that we should be talking about. I think if you ask the abortion question, you get some pretty good answers. It would not be 100% agreement.
Mr. Vance?
Yeah, I know you keep on asking, sir. And I'll answer yours.
Yeah, I'm concerned about the seniors living on fixed incomes in
Sure.
Ohio as an aging population. And with this double-digit inflation, if it continues, it's just going to devastate
That's right.
their savings. Do you have any solutions at all for how do we slow down this rate of inflation? Is it just the Federal Reserve that's it's doing it, or is there multiple factors?
Well, I mean, look, it's certainly pretty complicated what's going on, and some of the solutions are long-term and some of them are short-term. Obviously, just personally, like I think about this issue a lot because I was raised by my mama and papa. I can't imagine what it would have been like if they were trying to raise me on 7, 8, 9, 10% inflation, right? So especially with how bad the opioid problem is, we've got a lot of grandparents who are raising grandkids on a fixed income that have no help and really are getting slammed by what's going on right now. I guess sort of a couple of short-term and a couple of long-term questions, right? So short-term, one of the big drivers of inflation is energy. I talked about energy earlier. We've got to bring energy costs down, not just for consumers at the pump or home heating costs, but energy is a component of so many other parts of the economy. We've got to bring energy costs down. Two, we need to stop printing money nonstop that we don't have to support federal programs that we don't really need right now. The Build Back Better agenda, what's so weird about it is that it's an agenda in search of a problem that no longer exists, okay? Even if I would disagree with how Biden would fix that problem doesn't even exist anymore. The problem in our economy is not a lack of sufficient resources. It's a lack of, we're paying too much it's not that there aren't enough dollars in the economy, it's that the goods that are in the economy keep on going up and up and up in price. Okay, so Build Back Better is not a solution to the problem that we have right now, not even close. Longer term, the only way to really get control of the inflation in this country is to make more of our own stuff. Okay, we've all learned that global supply chains are incredibly fragile. When you have things like COVID or war in Ukraine, you create a scenario where people can't depend enough on their own local economy because our own local economy doesn't make enough of the stuff that we need. We need to bring more manufacturing, more supply chains back to the United States. That's the long-term solution to inflation.
Vance,
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
are you pro or against the death penalty?
Well, look, I think it's kind of an odd question. and let me just be clear here, because the death penalty happens so infrequently in this state already. I mean, when was the last time we executed a prisoner in the state of Ohio?
A couple years ago.
Okay, so it's something that happens incredibly infrequently. I think for extraordinarily evil crimes, okay, the death penalty is there for a reason. But I also think that the death penalty happens so infrequently that it's not even a real issue in the state of Ohio anymore.
So what would you say to voters who say, well, you say you're 100% pro-life, but wouldn't that also be, if you're supporting the death penalty, wouldn't that also not be pro-life?
Well, I think the difference is we're talking about the life of an innocent person with abortion that's being destroyed and they didn't do anything wrong. And with the death penalty, you're talking about somebody who's given due process of law, multiple appeals, and then is eventually put to death. So I don't think the cases are actually comparable at all. At the end of the day, just because you're pro-life, and I am, doesn't mean we can't have a criminal justice system in this country.
What is your stance on big tech censorship?
Well, it's ridiculous, right? I mean, we basically live in a country where we've given over 4 companies the complete control of the flow of information in our country. They're monopolists. They're very often in bed with the communist Chinese. Like, they actually have financial relationships with the communist Chinese, and they make it hard for people to speak their mind, right? Like, people say it's just Facebook, or it's just Twitter, or it's just Instagram. Like, whatever it is, that's the modern public square. Most people get their information primarily online. If you allow those 4 companies to control what people consume, how they're allowed to consume it, you effectively control how people think in this country, certainly what they're allowed to say. That's not acceptable. It's just not acceptable.
One more debate. Border policy?
What's up?
One more.
Yeah, sure, okay.
You had said during the debate that you want to make sure that, people who come here illegally aren't getting benefits.
Yeah.
Right now, I know refugees and asylum should get benefits, but otherwise, people are not able. Are you saying that that's happening, we're aware of it, or are you talking about refugees and asylum?
No, so there are all of these loopholes. Even though the letter of the law says that legal aliens are not allowed to get welfare benefits, there are all of these loopholes that make that not true. Okay, so I'm gonna butcher the exact statistic, but something close to a majority of illegal immigrants are in some ways a beneficiary of a state or federal welfare program. That's especially true when you're talking about immigrants, illegal immigrants from Central America. Again, I don't want to quote you a wrong statistic, but it's a large number of people who come here illegally are receiving welfare benefits. Now, there are different loopholes. For example, if you yourself are an illegal alien, but your kid is not an illegal alien, then you can, through your child, get welfare benefits that you wouldn't be able to get. And they're not just welfare benefits for the child, but they're also to you. Or Section 8 housing, for example. Federal housing program administered through the states, you can get those programs as illegal aliens. So I think there are a lot of ways, actually, in which illegal aliens can receive welfare benefits. One in particular, by the way, a good buddy of mine just had a case of identity theft where 10 separate illegal aliens, he lives in Texas, 10 separate illegal aliens were using his identity or getting various forms of federal assistance. The IRS wouldn't even tell him who was using his identity illegally, even though it was his social security number. Like that, when that's happening, that's another loophole. It's another example of how actually it is possible for illegal immigrants to get welfare benefits. I know this is the last question. Thank you all. Thanks for being here. Good to see you all. Take care.